An anti-corruption prosecutor has come under fire this week for allegedly sabotaging high-profile investigations. We discuss what this means for the future of Ukraine's anti-corruption efforts. Hromadske traveled to a checkpoint near the Crimean border to see how one popular Ukrainian band showed their support for Ukraine's political prisoners. Beach season in Donbas. We take a look at how the war in Ukraine's occupied eastern territories has affected holiday makers and tourism in the region. What's holding Europe together amid increasing internal and external pressures? We talk populism and shifting alliances with political theorist Luke van Middelaar. War and trauma in Ukraine. Hromadske sat down with Professor Kati Karas to discuss how traumatic events in the country's history have shaped modern-day Ukraine. Tensions are mounting between anti-corruption bodies in Ukraine. This week, the Qualification Disciplinary Commission of Prosecutors failed to fire Nazar Kholodnytskyi, the head of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's office, despite other anti-corruption activists calling for the action. This comes as the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor closes a high-profile case against the Interior Minister's son, who has been accused of embezzlement, and People's Front MP Denis Dzhenzersky, who failed to declare his debts of more than $150 million. We have Anti-Corruption Action Center's Anastasia Krasnosilska in the studio to tell us what this means for anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine. Thank you for being with us, Ms. Krasnosilska. And before we go into discussion, I suggest that we see a report that Hromadske has prepared. Hromadske has been following the Kholodnytskyi case. Let's take a look at the report prepared by our colleagues who were present at the Qualification Disciplinary Commission of Prosecutors hearing on the 26th of July.
On July 26, the Qualification Disciplinary Commission of Prosecutors met to decide whether to dismiss Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office head Nazar Kholodnytskyi, who has been accused of interfering with anti-corruption efforts. Journalists, representatives of the Anti-Corruption Action Center, and other civic activists came to the hearing.
We only want the law to be respected. We demand to be let into the hearing because we have the right to be there, as does the media and the public.
The decision to close the hearing to the public should be justified before the cameras. The problem is that they made this decision behind closed doors, and it's a direct violation of the law.
After the break, journalists were allowed into the meeting room where the decision of the Disciplinary Commission was announced. Despite accusations of interfering with criminal investigations, the Commission did not dismiss Kholodnytskyi. The public heckled the decision.
So, Ms. Krasnosilska, the Qualification Commission says that Ukraine's legislation does not allow to fire Nazar Kholodnytskyi as head of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. But we understand that he still may be fired from his position as a prosecutor, which will make him unfit for holding the office. Why the Qualification Commission didn't go this way?
Well, the Qualification Commission allowed itself a unique manipulation with the law. According to the law, they perfectly have the powers to dismiss Kholodnytskyi as a prosecutors. They actually found that his actions were a grave violation. And the result of that should have been a decision on Kholodnytsky being unfit for a position of the prosecutor. Yep. And this basically should have led to his dismissal from position of the prosecutor and, of course, from position of from the head of Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's office. This was a lawful way for the Commission. But the Commission took a very partial decision. They actually agreed that what Kholodnytsky committed was a grave offense, but they only sanctioned him with a reprimand, which is nothing, and which we regard as a direct violation of the law on prosecution.
Well, this is the position of anti-corruption activists, but what the anti-corruption bodies are planning to do now?
Well, actually, this is also the position of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. They also stated in their official statement that, yes, Qualification Commission had all the powers to deem Kholodnytsky unfit and as a result of this decision to fire him as a prosecutor. Unfortunately, the Commission failed to perform its duty, and for us, this is first of all a sign that prosecutorial reform in Ukraine not just failed, but is non-existent. One of the aims of prosecutorial reform was basically to provide for opportunities for prosecution to purify literally itself from tainted prosecutors. Unfortunately, in the case of Kholodnytsky, we now see that this is not working.
One of the most high-profile cases that Mr. Kholodnytsky has closed is the case against the son of the Interior Minister, Mr. Avakov. What is the official explanation for the closure of the case, and what are theories by other people?
Well, actually, this case was closed in a very cynical way. Just 3 months ago, in March this year, anti-corruption prosecutors agreed that there were enough evidences collected in the case and that the case should be filed to the court. However, after this decision has been taken, prosecutors, without even informing NABU detectives, hold some additional investigative activities, questioned some additional witness, and based on this, somehow made a decision that there were not enough evidences. For us, it's a very strange logic when prosecutors first say that evidences that were collected were enough, but then all of a sudden change their opinion. For us, it is also very symptomous that the case against the son of the Minister of Interior, a very influential person in this country, is being closed, and just a week after that, close ally of the Minister of Interior, Mr. Avakov, actually comes to prosecutor's office to somehow protect Kholodnytsky against mass protest.
When you say we and us, do you mean just the Anti-Corruption Center or other public organizations?
We mean civil society, which has been very active in basically pushing for establishment of Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office and Anti-Corruption Bureau. And we have had very high hopes of the activities of Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, which unfortunately now are not fulfilling themselves.
I want to show you some document because the prosecutors in Ukraine have been divided over this case, and here on the screen we can see a petition where prosecutors have signed in support of Kholodnytsky. However, there were a number of prosecutors who refused to sign the document. And my next question to Anastasia Kholodnytskyi from the Anti-Corruption Action Center is, what do you make of this?
We actually think that prosecutors who signed this letter protect themselves because, yes, they were the ones who took decisions to close cases or manipulate the cases. Allegedly, they did so upon request or pressure from their director, Mr. Kholodnytsky. So when they are trying to protect Kholodnytsky, they are actually protecting themselves. Because if Kholodnytsky took unlawful decisions, they unfortunately were part of this scheme and also have to be worried about their future.
I remind the listeners and viewers that the letter says that certain individuals are trying to compile a list of personal complaints against SAPO's work, which accumulated throughout SAPO's performance, regardless of whether these complaints are part of the Commission's subject area, as well as use it as a way of influencing the Commission's decision to fire the head prosecutor. The team of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office cannot see this as anything else other than pressure, not as much as on the SAPO head himself, but on each and every one of us. This is exactly what Ms. Krasnosilska said, that they are trying to protect themselves. But how real is the danger? As they protect themselves and each other, do you feel that the civil society and some other anti-corruption bodies have enough power to push the case forward?
Well, basically, first off, now the decision to bring Kholodnytskyi to justice lies on the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. NABU director informed that there are allegedly two criminal cases against Mr. Kholodnytskyi. These cases are being investigated by the Prosecutor General Office, and the Prosecutor General Yuriy Lutsenko is the one who is responsible for serving notification of suspicion to Kholodnytskyi in these two cases, so this is what we await from him. Second, this huge problem with Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office basically endangers all the anti-corruption infrastructure in Ukraine, because even after anti-corruption court is being created, without independent prosecutor's office, we will literally have no strong cases to be heard by this court, and our hope of bringing corrupt officials to justice will once again not be fulfilled.
Earlier this year, it was revealed that the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine has bugged Mr. Kholodnytskyi's office. From your point of view, how legal, how lawful was this, and what impact it had on the further proceedings?
Well, of course it was legal, because no one in this country can bug someone without judicial warrant.
Well,
the case within at least
can.
National Anti-Corruption Bureau cannot,
can.
at least National Anti-Corruption Bureau cannot, and technologically this is being done not even by Anti-Corruption Bureau but by State Security Service. Once again, the whole story was as follows. The criminal case has been opened by Prosecutor General Office. They were the ones who received judicial warrants for wiretapping a number of other investigative activities, and they only asked Anti-Corruption Bureau for technical assistance, which result as what we now know as wiretapping in Mr. Kholodnytskyi's office.
How independent in their actions is the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and its head, Mr. Sytnyk?
We have seen no indications of Anti-Corruption Bureau being dependent. We know of no cases that have been closed or that have been poorly investigated intentionally by NABU detectives, but unfortunately we have some bad indications about activities of Mr. Kholodnytskyi, and we're having these indications for at least a year by now, so they appeared actually much earlier than tapes from his office have been revealed.
Hromadske approached Mr. Kholodnytskyi for comment twice. However, he declined to speak on the matter because he was tired. Anyway, let's take a look at what Kholodnytskyi's deputy Maxim Hryshuk had to say on the matter.
The head of NABU, Artem Sytnyk, stated that there is no cooperation between NABU and SAPO because the top criminal cases are being closed.
NABU and SAPO work together. We both sign procedural documents. How can you say there is no cooperation?
Because you recently closed the cases of Avakov and Zhanjarsky.
I cannot comment on the cases that I'm not supervising, so neither Avakov's nor Dzerzhinsky's case. I can only discuss what I know.
But as deputy head, you should know everything about these cases.
No, we have the head of the office for this. I can only comment on cases that I supervise.
You're deflecting from the issue.
I disagree. You're asking questions and I'm giving you answers.
As a SAPO representative, do you think Kholodnytskyi has a moral right to keep his position?
I am for a legal resolution of this case, and there is a legal decision.
So this was Maxim Hryshuk, his deputy to the head of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, Mr. Nazar Kholodnytskyi. He was given the answers to journalists' questions after Hromadske has unsuccessfully tried to put questions to Mr. Kholodnytsky himself. Anastasia Krasnosilska from the Anti-Corruption Action Center is with us. You know what I spotted? Both Mr. Kholodnytsky and Mr. Hryshchuk seem to be rather passionless about the case. Yes, they keep a stiff upper lip, they do not show emotion, while the head of the center that you work for, Mr. Shabunin, showed in the first report, he was all over the place with his hands and all this kind of stuff. Does it mean that you are being over-emotional with the case? And how this impact on the perception of the case by the public?
Well, we only comment on the case based on Ukrainian legislation. We read the law on the prosecution in Ukraine, and there we see full capacity of Qualification Commission of Prosecutors to fire Mr. Kholodnytsky as a prosecutor if they see he have committed a grave offense. They actually saw a grave offense in what he did and what was presented in tapes from his office. So we are very much, of course, upset that Qualification Commission of Prosecutors, which was presented to the society as part of the prosecutorial reform, actually failed to implement the hope of the reform and simply to apply the law in a due way. Of course, we are a bit emotional about this, but this does not change what is written in the law on prosecution.
Can we say that there is a coalition of public activists or public organizations, non-government organizations working for the success of the anti-corruption case in the case of the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office? And if so, are there any attempts on the side of SAPO to organize public activists in their support?
We cannot claim that these efforts were by SAPO to organize people in their support, but we have clearly seen how Mr. Kiva, who used to be an advisor to Mr. Avakov, Minister of the Interior, Mr. Kiva actually brought some people in front of prosecutor's office to show kinds of public support for what SAPO is doing. And for us, this is a very clear indication of political nature of SAPO's activities, which is, of course, something unacceptable for newly established anti-corruption body.
You said that public activists do not have any proof or any evidence of Mr. Sytnyk or the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, which he heads, being dependent on whoever. But we have a video of Mr. Sytnyk going to the president's office in the middle of the night. Let's have a look.
Трасою чекаємо, коли виїдуть візитери Петра Порошенка. З вулиці виїжджає Мерседес С-класу, за ним Шкода і Мерседес Віто.
So, what do you make of this? Why such a secrecy? Why in the middle of the night, if they don't have anything to hide?
Well, first of all, meetings in the middle of the night, sometimes in his private residence, this is the style of the president of Ukraine. This is his normal way of arranging business meetings. So Mr. Sytnyk, unfortunately, had nothing to do about this and was not in a position to influence this. Secondly, these meetings had actually been held in April this year, but information has been released just probably a few weeks ago, probably a week or two ago. From April till the end of July, we haven't seen any indications of NABU taking political decisions. No cases closed by detectives. NABU did not change their position on anti-corruption court. It remained strong and it remained very uncomfortable for the presidential administration. So after that visit, we still have no indications and nothing to blame Anti-Corruption Bureau with.
One of the questions that arises from your answer is about the accessibility of information and accessibility for the public of the information that you hold and you disseminate. Quite frankly, how often are you on air on leading Ukrainian TV channels or radio stations. Do you have any problems with this?
We have problems with accessing some media channels close to some, I would say, influential politicians. For example, personally, I haven't been on air on the 5th channel, allegedly connected, so to say, to the president of Ukraine for more than a year by now, which for us is also a bit symptomous. Our messaging, of course, is very uncomfortable for many politicians in Ukraine, while others say that these are authorities or politicians to blame. Our strong position is that corruption as well as responsibility should always have a surname. And when we have allegations against the president of Ukraine or any other officials, we actually name the surnames, which is, of course, a bit uncomfortable for some Ukrainian media.
Ms. Krasnosilska, forgive me for venturing into the field of forecasts, presumptions, and suppositions, but we have elections coming closer and closer to us. From your point of view, and you, of course, know almost all about anti-corruption fight, how prominent this issue will be on the agenda of people who will be competing for highest positions in Ukraine?
Well, I would say that people who will be competing have no choice to ignore anti-corruption fight in their pre-electoral messaging. However, we think that this issue will be highly exploited, and unfortunately, I have to say that taking under control Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's office is actually a strategy for defense for top officials now as they are being pushed to establish anti-corruption court, independent anti-corruption court with international participation. However, from our side, we of course will not let the society forget that now, once again, the Prosecutor General Yuriy Lutsenko, who we think still has some political ambitions, he is responsible for fixing the problem with Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's office and bringing Kholodnytskyi to liability.
Well, we'll see. Thank you very much, Anastasia Krasnosilska. Ms. Krasnosilska from the Anti-Corruption Center Anti-Corruption Action Center was in the studio of Hromadske International, and we will be back in a second. Today is day 77 since Ukrainian filmmaker Oleg Sentsov, who is held in a Russian prison on fabricated charges, announced his hunger strike. While many Ukrainians are doing what they can to raise awareness and aid Sentsov's release, one Ukrainian pop band found a creative way to support the political prisoner. The band Boombox played a protest concert dedicated to Sentsov and Ukrainian political prisoners alike, right by the checkpoint separating mainland Ukraine from the annexed peninsula. Hromadske was at the gig to see how the event unfolded.
Because my grandmother and grandfather live there. I want to go to the sea and visit them. No.
Sentsov? Yes, of course we know. He's a political prisoner. I know he's being held in Russia. We're just hearing about the concert, which we can see and hear here. The security guard told us.
People don't say anything about Sentsov. We've only heard about this from Ukrainian sources, Ukrainian television, Ukrainian radio, and when we visited Ukraine.
This whole fight for Sentsov continues on the separation line. With Crimea, it's a concert without people, a concert for the land. It's so that the land listens to what's happening and that people in this part of the land, which was illegally seized, for those who have been banned for some reason, by some other state, listen to these messages. This is for our and your freedom.
I'm a pensioner and a widow, and I live on the minimum wage, so it's difficult for me. But I want to go. My sister is dead, another one lives here, as well as all my nieces and nephews, and everyone I have is here. I don't know. My son-in-law buys the tickets, so it's cheaper for me to get in.
Why am I going to Crimea? I went to visit my sister. Now I am returning home. The last time was 3 years ago.
A non-violent protest as part of a film shooting. The film will be called Returned Ticket. One of the main themes is drawing the international community's attention to the Kremlin's political prisoners. In particular, one of them is Oleg Sentsov. We also have a concert. I've called this a concert for the land. We did not plan for such an influx of people. I'm really worried that we don't have enough water and toilet facilities, for example.
In Crimea, if you ask about Sentsov, very few people know of him. Very few people know why he's incarcerated. People are not even interested in this information at all. We put on our wreaths here. You can't wear them there. We put them on when we crossed, although we wear these wreaths in the car. My son goes to Zahid Fest every year. He also has tickets for it now. I painted this flag for him in 2014. We came to listen, we came to stand on this land where we can raise this flag, because we can't do this where we are. The border guards asked me how we brought it here. Did we just walk like this? And I said, boys, you understand we can't walk like this over there. We had to hide it. We only talk about Sentsov within our own circles. I don't hear about him anywhere. I don't hear anything about him anywhere at all. There's no information. When there's a holiday, they play Russian songs. They hang up their flags. No one says anything. Today, the court sentenced our activist from Serebrenka in the Rozdolny district, Volodymyr Balukh. He is also in prison. Yesterday, I dried out some crackers for him. Yesterday, the weather meant we could open the windows, but the crackers got wet, so I dried them out again today, because I knew I'd take them for the road, that I was coming here.
Мы в Севастополе живем. Мы живем в Украине. Нам нужна Украина.
Ничто больше не волнует нас. Стали целым и телом людьми с вами на час. И ничто не волнует нас, понимаешь? Нет, нет! Объясните теперь нам, вахтер, почему я на ней так стою?
Я була на концерті, зараз їду додому. В Армянськ.
Чому вирішили прийти?
Ну, тому що це наше. Це наше. Ні. Ні. Вже, боятись, я не боїмося. Чому? А що ми робимо таке? Це моя, як вам сказати, біль.
The full story is on our webpage. Also, sign up for our brand new newsletter if you would like to receive Hromadske International's weekly highlights. The sign-up box is on the upper right-hand side of the site. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Search Hromadske International. For the people living on and around the Donbas conflict line, options for summer holiday destinations are limited. In the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk, there is only one beach resort, and it's considered expensive. Hromadske traveled to beach resorts on both sides of the contact line to find out how the war in Donbas has affected the region's holidaymakers and tourism industry.
This is Syadowy in the Donetsk region. It is the only resort town in the occupied part of Donbas. It is the main vacation destination for people from the self-proclaimed People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Vacationers say it's expensive here.
Why did you choose to come here?
There is nowhere else to go. This is the only resort town in Donetsk.
How much money have you spent to stay here?
Oh, it's expensive. I've spent the equivalent of $160.
For how long?
2 weeks. And that's without splurging.
This man came from the neighbouring self-proclaimed Luhansk Republic. He's happy with his vacation, but the 10 o'clock curfew is a problem for young people.
What do you think of the prices here?
They're fine.
How much does it cost to rent a place to stay?
Well, I'm staying in a fancy one, so it's about $40 per night.
About how much do you plan to spend on your vacation?
We're planning to leave tomorrow. We need to get back to work.
How are you enjoying your vacation? What is there to do?
It's quite fine. There aren't many places to go to, and everything closes at 10 p.m. But I'm enjoying myself. My daughter, though, would like to stay out longer and go out more.
Beach season is the time when locals make money. They sell vegetables from their gardens. Locals say there are more visitors than last year.
How is the influx of tourists this summer?
Very good.
Did you manage to make a living over the summer?
It depends on how well the garden does. But yes.
And there were more vacationers this year compared to last?
Yes.
So things have gotten better?
A bit better.
And this is Urzów, in Ukrainian government-controlled part of Donetsk region. Beach season is in full swing. People who used to go to Syadowy now come here for vacation.
This is my first time in Urzów. I'm happy. It's a beautiful place, just super.
Where did you go for vacation before?
We used to go to Syadowy before the conflict began. It was great there. And to the Belosarayska split. But Urzów is the best of them all.
Tourists say staying here is inexpensive. Everyone can find something within their price range. Urzów's residents are also happy. The cleaning lady of a local hotel says people come here from all over Ukraine.
The season is off to a good start, very active. People here are clean, they reserve accommodation in advance. Families come with kids.
Where do they come from?
They come from all kinds of cities.
These girls are from Vinnytsia, west-central Ukraine. In Urzów, they're meeting with family from occupied Donetsk.
Everything is great, it's beautiful and the sea is warm.
How are the prices? Not too high?
Well, no, they are okay, given it's the seaside, everything has its price.
Each year, about 200,000 people come to Urzów for vacation. The locals say that 2014, the year the war began, was tough, but since 2015, the situation has stabilised. According to the occupying authorities, Syadowy was visited by over 100,000 people during last year's beach season.
The European Union has been shaken by internal conflicts since the Eurozone crisis in 2009, and more recently by the influx of migrants from Africa and refugees from the Middle East. Yet this strain from both within and outside the EU's borders is also what impels member states to work together. Hromadske sat down with political theorist Luc van Middelaar to discuss the fundamental duality of the EU, the challenges of populism and shifting alliances, and what holds Europe together despite increasing internal and external pressures.
Do you think that Europe has kind of a natural tendency of enlargement? Because we see European history mostly as a history of enlargement, and that's something very vital for Ukrainians.
Yes.
Because we hope to be EU member one day.
Yes.
Do you think that there is a natural tendency of enlargement, or rather the enlargement has stopped?
I think there is still an inbuilt driving force for enlargement, and that is not only the treaty, which says that any European state can become a member. So if you're a European state, you can apply, and that clearly is the case for Ukraine. Unlike for, let's say, Morocco, which also tried in the past. And their European leader said, no, we're sorry, you're in Africa. In Ukraine, you don't get that answer because Ukraine is in Europe. But it's more than the treaty, I would say. In the end, it is the underlying idea of a European civilization which holds us together, and to which all along European integration history also people have appealed. And I think that's also what on the Ukrainian side Ukrainian people and leaders are feeling very, very strongly, that it is also by appealing to that European identity, the underlying identity and values, that you prove in a way that you are a European state. And not only by pointing out the letter of the treaty. So you need an appeal to identity, of we Europeans, and not they Europeans. Because it may surprise you in Ukraine, but of course within the European Union, Brussels is perceived, even in my country, I'm from the Netherlands, as something far away,
Europe inside Europe.
As a foreign occupying power almost. And of course Europe also has to provide advantages and be democratic.
When was the moment that Europe was really present for its citizens? Do you think that we can count this moment from early 50s, or did it happen recently?
No, I wouldn't take it from early 50s. I mean, when Europe was only a market, it was only interesting for businesses, perhaps for farmers, people who had something at stake there. And it was for exports. It is only, I think, with the euro, on the one hand, with the currency, and the crisis over the currency, and with migration, with free movement between borders, so basically the past 10 years, that for ordinary citizens, when they read the newspaper, it is front page news. Often the crisis, Greece, Italy, Germany elections, all over Europe, they're talking about the same stories more or less at the same time, with the euro crisis since 2010, migrant crisis 2015, and there, all of a sudden, Europe became very concrete, and people realized it makes a difference whether you are inside or outside the Eurozone, whether you are inside or outside Schengen for borders, and that is a new experience. Many people disliked it, some liked it, but I think it is normal that it takes time, because, well, I'm a historian by training, so I think 5 or 10 years is not a very long time, in fact, if you look at long-term trends, and that this new experience of what it means to be in Europe, what it means to share a border, a southern border, to share an eastern border, another discovery, is relatively new, and I think citizens in Europe, they are not fools. Even if some of their politicians take them for fools, people are not fools. They also look around. They see what's happening in Russia, in China, in Washington, and perhaps they're not always at ease with the way Brussels is run, but at the same time they know that the world is changing and that they have to adapt to that world.
You talk about these pivotal events, you talk about Suez Crisis, then the fall of the Berlin Wall. Do you think that now is happening something very substantial that can also drive Europe in a different direction? And if yes, what is that?
Well, I think the combination of Trump in Washington and Putin in Moscow puts a lot of strain on the whole European state system. We already discussed both a little bit. It makes it it's a strong outside pressure on European states to defend their own interests, their own values in the world, to realize that if we want to survive as a civilization in a way, from Iceland to Ukraine and from Finland to Portugal, we have to work better together. And the war over in eastern Ukraine is a very element of truth in there, obviously. But you know much more about it than I do. But I see it, and it is clear to outside observers that there also the future of Europe is at stake.
According to Professor of Comparative Literature Kathy Karas, whose area of research focuses on trauma and language, events in Ukraine's history, such as the Holodomor, could have had long-lasting traumatic effect on the whole nation. Fast forward 80 years, and for those struggling through the ongoing war in Ukraine's occupied eastern territories, the effects of trauma are more prevalent than ever. Hromadske sat down with Professor Karas to discuss how Ukraine's history has shaped modern-day Ukraine and the people who live there.
Reading your book, and when there were discussion about a Holocaust or the war, what is specific? Is it really possible that the whole society is traumatized, and what it means, how to deal with that? And I'm speaking, of course, as the Ukrainian, the society which lived through the revolution, which was very unexpected, and the war which we've never experienced for the last 50 years.
So you're asking whether it's possible for an entire society to be traumatized?
Yeah. And what are how we can understand that?
I think, yes, it is quite possible that, and in fact, probably likely, that when there are major collective events, especially events like the Holodomor, that was aimed at Ukrainians in general, and not just some Ukrainians, but were really aiming at undermining the nation, as I understand it. Or the Holocaust, which is aimed at the Jews. Or even things like incest or rape, which seem individual, but we could argue are aimed more largely at undermining women. That there is an effect that takes place not only for the people who went through it, but for the society as a whole. Because almost inevitably, especially in genocides, what is part of what makes them traumatic is not only the suffering, killing, dying, starving, but also the denial that surrounds it. So in the Holocaust, the world for a large time denied it, and many still do. From what I read, the Holodomor, Stalin's, the Soviet Union denied it, and even more recently, politically, when people want to make friends with Russia, they try to downplay the genocidal aspects of the Holodomor. So what happens is you get a society in which some people are suffering from trauma, which is in part created by the situation of denial. And the analysts, Françoise Devoine and Jean-Max Gaudier, they're two French analysts who work on history, madness, and trauma. And they talk about societies that can be created around the denial, kind of perverse societies of denial. So it's very important to see the collective dimension of these events and to try to bring them out in the light and talk about them.
But what are the indicators? Because it's also, if the society is in this situation, then somehow you need to admit that, and somehow you need to talk about that. So what could be the indicators?
Yeah, so I think it's always a matter of each case and each interpretation. There's never one simple set of symptoms that holds for all people or all countries. It's specific, rather. I'll give you an example from a woman who runs the Slovo House, where in Kiev, where there were literary writers who were imprisoned and some of them executed during the Soviet Union. And she said, when I asked her why she was doing this project that she created online to let people know about these writers and who they were and where they lived, she said that her mother had always been very nervous, very afraid of everything. And she felt that something was wrong because her mother seemed to be carrying with her this fear that had come from the period of the Soviet Union. And so one indicator for her that there was something to which she and others needed to bear witness was that her parents seemed afraid. They seemed to be timid people. So that would be one, perhaps in this case, that was one example where a woman recognized in her parental generation the symptom of something like trauma, and she herself decided to bear witness to what they were not able to.
And how we also can talk about that, while even talking about the history books,
yes.
Because every country in his history is a victim. But that was a while ago. Now we're living in a different world when we can read the books of the others.
Yes, many people have asked me since I've been here in Ukraine about this question because it's clearly so relevant here. I can take an example from when I was in Moscow, where I got the same question by young people who said that Putin was saying that the Soviet Union was a trauma, so the Russians are victims, and then using that to justify all sorts of things, including invading Ukraine, annexing Crimea, and so on. So it's very dangerous. The reason I think that trauma is a more useful concept than, let's say, victim is that, again, trauma is not something I can ever possess. The experience of trauma, the flashbacks, the nightmares, I believe, say to each individual and say to a country, there's something here you don't understand, you need to work on it, you will never fully possess it, and it is linked to others. So it commands listening, and the action it commands is listening. It does not command revenge. The nightmare, essentially, the central symptom of trauma is the nightmare that wakes you up in Freud and in others. The nightmare wakes you up. It says, wake up, listen and see. And I think that's a very different message from define yourself as a victim and go get revenge. And so I think trauma calls out for listening to others and addressing others.
Thank you from the entire team of Hromadske International. We're here to explain Ukraine and Eastern Europe for you. Go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua, where you'll find full versions of our interviews and reports. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We're there for you 24/7. And goodbye.